broadcast. Okay, why don't I broadcast into all attendees? Which
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay, bye.
Hello.
Hi, Dr. Difede.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you today?
I'm fine, thanks.
no.
Sorry? Ooh, I don't know what that was, but was not pleasant. Okay.
So my question is, are we broadcasting now if we have all of these participants?
Yeah, well, that wouldn't be good, so.
I don't think so.
Mhm.
I think Sharon had to go live.
Okay, so I cannot share my screen, so I have to be made one of the hosts. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. So in order for me to share my screen, that has to change, or you could load the slides for me, but it would be certainly easier if I could just click through them on my own, but I've done that before. Okay. Okay, so it's on the host now. Okay, I'm just gonna test this, and then I'm gonna take them off again. We're at the very end. Okay, perfect. All right, great. I can stop sharing.
Is Sharon on?
So yeah, we're live right now.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, we're having technical difficulties. Thank you for your patience.
And just so you ladies can hear me, once we get started, I'll be going ahead and recording the session, and then I'll be watching for the comments in the chat.
Thanks, Sharon. I think we'll just give it a couple more minutes. I'll go ahead and give it one more minute and we can start. Sharon, do you want to go ahead and hit the record button?
We are all set to go. Thank you, ladies.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Renew April event. This month, we are focused on mental health. Mental health is a sensitive but very important topic, especially for what we've been dealing with over the last year with the pandemic. Renew has invited Dr. Joann Difede to join us today in our mental health discussion. We will have a presentation from Dr. Difede and a Q&A afterwards. Dr. Difede is the founding director of the Program for Anxiety and Traumatic Stress Studies, the Virtual Reality Lab, and Military Family Wellness Center, a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medical College, and an attending psychologist at New York Presbyterian Hospital Weill Cornell Medical Center. With over 25 years of experience in this field, Dr. Difede is recognized for pioneering work using virtual reality technology in the treatment of PTSD, consequent to the World Trade Center attack of September 11th, and more recently in treatment of combat-related PTSD and pain. Her treatment research spans survivors of burn injuries, terrorism, and occupations at risk for PTSD, including US soldiers, firefighters, police officers, journalists, disaster rescue and recovery workers, and healthcare workers. We are honored to have her with us today. Welcome, Dr. Joann Difede.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, to be talking to a group of people who are concerned about their mental health and the welfare of their families and employees. And I hope today to leave you with a few ideas that you probably hear circulating in the news about and to expand on some ideas about how to cope with the rather extreme circumstances we've all been living under. Here's the basic question that I'd like you to come away with an answer to is, why are so many people exhausted, irritable, having difficulty concentrating, or just plain out of sorts, and what can we do for it? You can skip to the bottom of the slide and see support one another, self-care, learn to recognize signs of distress that may require professional assessment, help yourself, help others, and when in need, get professional help. I'm going to touch upon all of those today, and I will certainly be available over the next few days if anyone wants to email me with more questions after the Q&A part of the discussion today. I want to just pause here, because often when you bring in an expert to talk about things, they're talking about a topic that you're interested in. But I want to really emphasize here that we're all in this together, and it's just a matter of degree. Everyone has been affected by the pandemic. And what I'm saying here applies as much to my colleagues and myself and my family as it does to you and yours. So it's personal to all of us. As you all know, the pandemic has caused a lot of trauma. There's a lot of attention paid to healthcare workers and the trauma and burnout that they may feel. But as is noted in more recent articles, the mental health effects of the pandemic are pervasive. They affect everyone. Everyone probably has a family member or a friend who's having a harder time, and all of us have had our moments or longer. And so it's great that you all want to pay attention to your own mental health and that of those around you. I'm going to go over some common reactions to stress and explain why we're all in it together, and what it is about how we're wired, and then talk about basic wellness and resilience. So as you see here, there is a picture of the human brain, and off on the right, you see a man walking in the woods, and he sees a snake. Well, what happens when humans perceive a threat to their life, we fight, we flee, or we freeze. And our bodies are hardwired to do that. It's not necessarily, and it's not usually in our conscious control. And as you see here, I've put COVID-19 over the snake. So in this situation, with a pandemic, with a virus that over a little over a year ago changed the way we're all living, we were all at risk of our lives, some more than others, depending upon age and health conditions. But it was a disease state for which we had no control over it. We had no cures. We didn't even have any treatments, and it's invisible. And so that, in some ways, made the threat in many ways, made the threat even worse than that of seeing a snake in the woods, which you presumably can generally get around. So what happens then is our bodies prepare this psychobiological cascade of events that occurs, and when the threat is chronic, then your brain is constantly reacting to threat, whether or not it remains there or not. So distress is what happens when the stressor is greater than the perceived ability to manage it. And again, we've all faced that at some point in the last year and a quarter. And some of us have had larger doses of it than others by virtue of our work or by virtue of our living circumstances. And then resilience is the capacity to manage it. I mean, there are decades of research that's showing that at the end of the day, when it's all over, most people will find a way to go on and adjust to the changes in their circumstances. However, a substantial minority will need professional help, and some people may indeed be disabled, but that will not be the case for the majority. So what were the risk of stressors? Because I hear more and more people going, now, why aren't I feeling better already? We still face, even if you're vaccinated, some of the same threats, and certainly the enormity of it is still with us, and it will take time as the effects of the pandemic may quiet to absorb it all, integrate it into our lives, and go on with the next phase, whether that's returning to work in person, returning to school for your children, changes in other day-to-day patterns of living. Well, the list of stressors is very long, as you can see from this. Risk of loved ones being infected, risk of becoming infected yourself. For some people, loss of loved ones, risk of unintentionally infecting other people, drastic changes to our social routines, whether it's work or school, caregiving, or recreational activities, vacations, change to daily personal care routines. I mean, everyone loved maybe working in their sweats for a while, but not so much anymore. And then another really big one is decreased contact with close others and loved ones. Social isolation is a big consequence of the pandemic that has had very significant mental health and health consequences that I'll talk a little bit about more. And as you can see, the list goes on, and I'm sure many of you have experienced some of these. Well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but probably many people in this audience took Psych 101, and you heard of Maslow, who's a humanist who developed a hierarchy of needs for humans. And at the bottom in the purple area are our physiologic needs like food and water, all the way up to self-actualization, which according to his theories, not everyone achieves, but we all need the first four to greater or lesser degrees to survive and certainly to thrive. And at its very fundamental nature, the pandemic has caused a threat to every level, and even the most basic rest. Going out and getting food was a risky activity for a long time, even if it was a trip to the grocery store. Certainly to our safety, the virus itself was a threat to our lives and remains so for many people. And then the isolation created by having to stay in our shelters for many, many months with very limited contact. And that, of course, was harder on people who were living alone than people who were living with significant others, and then up to, esteem needs from our work and our family life and self-actualization. So that's a way of helping to organize in your thinking the way you think about all of the kinds of stresses and threats that we've all faced. It's not the only way, but it's one that I think provides a good organizational scheme to help us understand some of what we've all faced. And some of the themes from the pandemic, as we've just touched upon already, are fear, getting sick or infecting others, anxiety, family concerns, which I'll go into more detail about, balancing the needs of yourself and your spouse and your children, or perhaps you're a caretaker for family members who are ill or older parents. And then one that's emerging now more is guilt perhaps over it's your lack of time and own sickness. But now, as we're moving to a different place in the pandemic with the vaccination, some people are beginning to feel what we call survivor's guilt. They're here and doing much better than some others in their social networks. And then social isolation and traumatic stress. So the effects of stress are pervasive. So why are we tired? Well, as I said earlier, when we begin this fight, flight, or freeze response, our sympathetic nervous system ratchets up, prepares us to run. And so we have things like physical problems, somatic problems, muscle tension, headaches, stomach indigestion, pain, TMJ. And that these can be caused from the lingering effects of constantly having our bodies prepare ourselves for fighting, fleeing, or freezing, when back in the days when going to the grocery store was potentially a threat to your life. Cognitive, the way we perceive the world changes when we have this psychobiological response. We may worry more than usual, and it seems to be taking the form of a lot of rumination in the pandemic, going over and over the same thing. Difficulty concentrating. Again, your body's on high alert. You become vigilant, looking around you for a threat that you can't even see. It's not like you're looking for a speeding car or snake. And so your brain at a preconscious level is like, okay, high alert, high alert, high alert. And it leads to difficulty concentrating because your brain's always tired, indecisiveness. And then in an interpersonal sphere, there's the traumatic stress effects, which I'm talking about, which can be irritability. If your body is always preparing to fight, flee, or freeze, you're always going to be tense, and that leads to a certain kind of irritability that comes with vigilance. You may have more angry outbursts. There is more violence associated with traumatic stress. You've probably seen in the paper that rates of domestic violence are up, rates of road rage are up. You've probably experienced the crazy driving that seems to go on more now than even in the past. Violence. And then on a more day-to-day level, family conflict. We're all living in many of us are living in closer quarters with people, many of whom are on Zoom at the same time. And that just can lead to more mundane kinds of conflict, like who gets the living room and you're talking too loud and things like that, which over time on a one-off isn't so bad, but over time can really begin to wear a person down. And then finally, behavioral. Humans are wired to avoid pain. And so what happens is we begin to avoid any signal of danger, and that may be our own internal thoughts, our emotions, people and places. So we may not reach out to people in the same way and talk because we don't want to talk about what we're really feeling and thinking, or they may remind us of a painful situation, and our worlds begin to narrow. And with the pandemic and having to stay home, they physically narrowed, and then you have the emotional narrowing. So again, why are we all so tired? Well, the effects of stress are pervasive, and we're constantly perceiving or worried that there is a threat to our lives. And so in sum, it leads to the most common problems that people will report are irritability and snapping at loved ones and colleagues, difficulty sleeping, you're up at odd hours, you can't fall asleep, you feel tired after you have a good night's sleep, worrying like what's going to happen next, will this pandemic really ever end? Will the vaccine be effective? Will it make me sick? For healthcare workers, guilt, I don't deserve that applause. For people who are not in roles that they of that sort, they may worry more, as I said, about or feel guilty more about surviving and being relatively okay, although most people are probably would say they're not where they want to be now. Again, muscle tension, hopelessness, it's going to last forever, and it may lead to a kind of sense of helplessness where you stop trying to do things differently and improve your situation. And then withdrawal, which is harder to see now because up until very recently, when things started to open up more, we couldn't enjoy the things we used to enjoy. They simply weren't available to us in the way they used to be. So the good news, as I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, is most of us will not develop traumatic stress disorders or depression or substance abuse or any of the somatic problems that I made reference to, but some of us will. And the thing that we can all do now, and I'm sure many of us are already doing, is as leaders, whether it's leader in your work environment or a leader at home, your mom or dad, you're in charge of your family and leading your family, is a consistent environment that facilitates social cohesion among whatever the social unit is, goes a long way to mitigate the effects of trauma and stress, such as we're experiencing with the pandemic. This slide just really illustrates the point that most of us will, in fact, have a natural recovery, despite how painful it may be right now. I'm going to just skip up here. So one of the things that we can all think about in facilitating this recovery is that it's the daily hassles in life that predict the maintenance of traumatic stress. So we may think there's a huge cause, right? A worldwide pandemic that has literally shut down societies and economies around the globe for a period of time. That if the cause is enormous, then the solution may have to match the intensity, and that the factors that maintain the traumatic stress have to match the intensity. And in fact, there's lots of research that suggests that just otherwise, that it's really the daily hassles in our life that maintain traumatic stress. And so if you're feeling a little bit out of sorts and you're not sure how to fix things in your personal environment, whether it's home or work, the good news is you probably make some changes to your routine and things that can be stressful in a daily life sort of way to improve things. So this matters both at home and at work. So what are they? Work hassles. Are you in charge of a work group where you can provide more predictable schedules or more predictable workflow? If you can, that will help. I talk to our own healthcare workers. Can we postpone some projects that are not essential? Obviously not patient care, but perhaps some of the changes to medical records or other big projects. And some of that was done internally. So ask yourself, as your employees come back to work or your kids go back to school, are there things we're trying to do that maybe we can just put off for a little while and decrease the level of stress? Of course, financial hassles are a really big one. Not having enough money or owing money is certainly one. And in this instance, thinking about job security. Are you in charge of a work group? And if you do have to have layoffs, can it be done in a way that is predictable? So for example, sometimes like one company has layoffs and then the group next door is worried in a similar industry about themselves, providing as much information as possible, and doing it quickly and in a finite way so that it just doesn't keep going on and on from one work group to the next is helpful. Household hassles. How are you running your family life? Is there a predictable routine for your children? Do they have regular bedtimes? Are there, are you and your spouse or partner, if you have one, keeping to regular routines? All of those things really do diminish our stress levels. This is all backed by research, which we don't have time to get into. But a lot of the things that your mom and dad told you and that you might be telling your own kids really are backed by a lot of research on stress now as some of the more effective ways of coping in the pandemic or under any extraordinary stress, whether whether it's the pandemic, being in war, terrorism, car accidents, assaults, it's all the same principles apply because our brains react to all of those perceived threats in the same way. And of course, social hassles, divorce rates up, difficulties getting along with families and friends are increased. One, because we're all living in close quarters, that just intensifies things. And then most people are not sleeping as well, they're not concentrating as well, they may have more pressure on them at work, more financial pressures, and that just increases the level of tension. And so we all do well to give each other a little more room and a lot of compassion. So for a minute before I go on to family life, and which I'm sure is a concern, I know a lot of people are beginning to go back to work in person, and so going over how some of this manifests at work is important. First and foremost, if you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, security and safety are essential. And so what information are you providing to your employees? At home, what information do your children have about going back to school regularly, and what are the safety protocols in place? Providing accurate, direct information that can be understood by a range of people in educational levels and walks of life is essential, and doing that well before people go back to work. And in that information, not only should be information about safety protocols, but the other basic needs, like where are your employees going to take meals? Is the cafeteria going to be open? Do you need to bring your own food? Will hours be the same? Some places are changing the hours to stagger people and the days. Does the individual worker have any control over that, or at least a voice in making some of those decisions before the policies are implemented? All of these things go a long way toward increasing a person's sense of efficacy and control over their daily environment, even if they don't have control over the big infrastructure of your corporate entity. Social distancing, what are those protocols? All of this applies equally to our home life as well as our work life. And education on the psychological effects of trauma, as we're talking about today, are also important. And so the single biggest problem that I'm hearing about to return to work is anticipatory anxiety. Anticipation is probably the single worst form of anxiety, and with the exception of really extreme situations like having a gun pointed at your head and going into combat, or direct threat, with a virus where you're likely to catch it. Anticipation is usually the worst part of the situation. And so getting into a new routine quickly, having accurate information is really, really essential, but explaining to people, and there's some great, if you haven't already gotten it, we're giving you a handout with a list of websites that have information on everything from coping, the psychological effects to information about the vaccine and about the virus itself. Having that sort of information available for your employees and your family is important. Again, for a minute, I know that this is a guild organization, but I can imagine, and you're all here voluntarily, but I can imagine that you are working perhaps with people who are a little more skeptical about mental health. And if you want to implement changes, it's not, sometimes the best way to do it is really to hit the bottom line, that is the economics for your company. And so if you can look at this slide just for a moment, the cost associated with absenteeism for mental health is huge, $111 billion a year. And one of the most family issues and illness and stress are among the greatest causes of prolonged work absence. About a third of our workforce are disabled at some point in their life, and a significant number is related to mental health. So having this information available and being able to say, well, low support at work and high job strain actually lead to absenteeism, loss of productivity, goes a long way to beginning to shift the culture. Okay, so that's the problem. What do we do about it? Well, It's a little bit like brushing your teeth, the things we have to do, we do every day. They are not glamorous. They may be a little mundane, but yet they affect the bottom line of this big problem dealing with the threat of the pandemic. Undoubtedly, you've all seen this somewhere before, at least the physical side. And having a routine is essential. I know we've all had our routines disrupted. It's been over a year now, so most of us have a routine, but that may now be disrupted again as we return to work, maybe a couple of days a week, or and our kids might be going back to school more, although maybe not consistently. So keeping to a schedule is essential. Harder to do under these circumstances, but essential. Develop a sleep ritual. Turn off your electronics. Read a book or listen to soothing music. Something to begin to get your brain to go, oh, okay, we're coming down a little bit from our daily routine, and getting ready to go to sleep. Behavioral cues are really important. And essentially by developing a routine, that's what you're doing. You're cueing your brain. You don't even have to think about it. At some point it becomes automatic. Time to go to bed. Exercise. So if we have this huge psychobiological response preparing us to fight, flee, or freeze in the face of any traumatic stressor, such as the pandemic, then a great way to counteract it is with a psychobiological response that would trigger relaxation and improvement in mood. And exercise is the single best way to do that. If you're doing nothing now, but turning, watching your favorite TV program, or NetNuts or something on one of the streaming channels, then doing anything is better than doing nothing. There's even research that shows that looking at a picture of a tree will induce just a little bit of some of our brain's happy chemicals. But doing more, going outside and taking a walk around the block would be better than not doing it all. And one of the biggest threats to actually doing that is getting in a routine, creating habits. It takes about 2 weeks to create a new habit, whether it's a good habit or a bad habit. And so just sticking with it in a way, you don't necessarily have to do it every day, but doing it regularly, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever you choose, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Getting in a routine and sticking with it are the harder parts. And of course, if you can follow guidelines and do even more and do cardiovascular exercise, assuming you have the health to do it, that's even better. But if you try to create this really big goal, it's kind of like New Year's resolutions, it may be harder to achieve it. And so starting small and working your way up in a consistent way is best. Of course, nutrition, we all have a tendency to overindulge something, whether it's food, sweets, alcohol, when we're under stress, being aware of it, and again, making small changes, starting with smaller goals and working your way up is generally the best way to have lasting change. And then I think as we're getting into more public awareness of mental health, there is more talk about the importance of social interactions and social support on our mental health and our physical health as well. Even, we're all wired a little differently. Some are at one extreme introverts and others at the other extreme extroverts, and everyone in between. But even if you're an introvert, having one person to talk to and share your thoughts with is important. There's quite a bit of research that shows that humans we do better, even if we're introverts and shy, with just a little bit of social contact on a regular basis. Making one positive interaction where you do something positive, you're consciously doing it. Could just be saying thank you to the person at the grocery store bags your grocery, but doing it in a way that they're aware that you mean it. Why is that important? Well, I mean, our brains actually, when we engage with people in that way, the reward circuitry in our brain is engaged and pumps out some of the happy chemicals, and in fact, doing those good deeds are actually good for us. And now that we know that, that's backed by science. Anticipating things that you enjoy, listening to music, reading a book, watching sporting events, hanging out with your family and friends, all of that actually engages our reward centers, and we get so if you happen to love music and you're going to go home and listen to music or play music, the reward circuitry gets activated and quite substantially just by thinking about some of those things, let alone then going and doing them. And then finally, it seems easy to do, but it's actually quite hard. Two of the most important elements of resilience and are naming our feelings, whatever they may be, and accepting where we're at, which is very hard to do, although fairly easy to say. So often we don't like to acknowledge that we're having, socially unacceptable feelings. We're angry at our coworker, we feel guilty about something we did or didn't do. And in the face of the profound loss that many have experienced, allowing ourselves to feel positive emotions and engage in activities that promote them can be hard for some people. Keep in mind that bad emotions, quote unquote, I'm using that in quotes, bad emotions like fear and anger, all of our emotions are actually signals to us and can be read as that way. But some of the bad ones like fear can be a signal to danger. And so in paying attention to how we're feeling, it is also, it's an essential tool like toothbrushing. If you want healthy teeth, you brush your teeth every day. You want to be healthier psychologically, just knowing what you're feeling and accepting it. Doesn't mean you have to say it and tell anybody else, although that often helps too. But even naming it to yourself and just accepting where you are is a big step toward your health. And accepting where we all are. I am asked all the time, when am I going to feel better? When is this going to be over? Well, I certainly don't know when it's going to be over either. But I can say that accepting that most of us are not living as we want to live, and that's more true for some people than others, is important. Like people ask me, like, my kids aren't living the way is it going to affect them? Will my career ever go back? It is as if we are in a war zone, and the path forward is recognizing where we are now and gradually implementing some of these changes if you're not already doing them. So again, to reiterate that the solution to many of these problems doesn't match the size or intensity of the cause. And so you may be thinking, I'm doing some of that, but I'm not really feeling better. And that may then be the point where you can look at what you're doing and say, well, am I doing it consistently? Am I doing it with another person? And if the answers to those are yes, and it's still not going your way, that really may be the time to reach out for professional help. And look at it as if you had a cough, you would likely, it lasted for several days and you're feeling physically out of sorts, it's likely that you might go to your healthcare provider or your primary care provider and say, hey, I've had this headache, I've had this cough. They would examine you, ask you some questions, and come up with a plan, whether it's seasonal cold and allergies or hopefully not something more severe. Look at your mental health the same way. If you're finding that you can't manage your sleep routines and you're having a hard time with your nutrition and you're isolated and feeling down in the dumps and can't get a grip on your feelings, that would be the time to go ahead and consult with a mental health professional. Fortunately, it is easier to do that today than it has been at any time in my professional career. Not only do we have the ease of reaching someone through a teleconnection, so you don't have to leave your home, which, in the past, those impediments like working all day in childcare prevented some people from going. There are also apps, and it may be that after one consultation, the recommendation is that you use a self-help program. But there's a lot out there, and so I would encourage you to to take advantage of it if you're not feeling well, and if you recognize, I'm going to go over signs and symptoms to recognize in our loved ones and encourage your loved ones. Some of the self-help interventions that you see here are ones you've probably heard about, may have tried yourself. Mindfulness is a very popular one these days, in yoga, which makes sense. We were all cooped up in our homes, and so doing an activity that had psychobiological effects like a mindfulness technique or yoga caught on, I would say, like wildfire in some cases. And then, as I just mentioned, there are the self-help apps. And again, in the list that you hand out that we're going to give you, there will be a list of some of the apps that we think are worth taking a look at. Most of you will have employers that have EAPs. That's a good place to start for personal problems and family problems and stress, and then they may in turn be able to refer you on to someone who can deal more specifically with your issues and problems, assuming that it requires more than a few sessions. For a lot of people, just having more extensive education than what I'm kind of giving an overview now will be enough to help them understand where they're at and how they need to go forward. But when that is not the case, there are evidence-based treatments that we have available for mental health issues like traumatic stress and depression. And I see here on this slide at the very bottom, I have big bold letters, something I mentioned a few minutes ago. Once you start a new routine, stick with it. One of the biggest threats to making some of these changes is stopping too soon, because you don't see immediate results. And it's hard to do. It's like you're walking in a thick forest and you can't see your path out. And stick with it for a couple of weeks. And even if you're exercising and trying some of these self-help things, there's still room to consult with either a professional or perhaps even just going to the gym with a friend or family member. Again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of social cohesion. Probably most of us were educated, whether we took to college and took Psych 101 or in high school, that mental health seemed very much like an individual endeavor. In the lower left corner here, I have a picture of Freud. And we were taught that our mental health is really about what goes on between our ears, our brains, or that wasn't even our brains, it was 100 years ago, it was still about our character, as opposed to a social endeavor. And I think the pandemic is helping us all to understand more that your social milieu and your social context, whether at home or at work, in community organizations, religious organizations, is essential to our well-being. So again, maintaining the connections, showing appreciation, checking in with other people, asking them how they're doing. Again, this whole idea about giving is better than getting. It's backed by science. And, the way our brains react with those mood improving chemicals is different and favors doing something for someone else. Okay, not sure what's going on. So, okay. So what about your social environment? Are you worried about someone? Most of us know someone who's having a much harder time than many other people. We may know more than one person. So there are a lot of things we can all do. You don't need degrees in mental health specialties in order to understand the basics. You probably do it every day, whether it's for your family, friends, children. Your children aren't doing as well, your spouse, if there's changes in their appearance, their behavior, their mood, and at work performance. If you see that consistently over a couple of weeks, that would be the time to step in. For employees, absenteeism or missing in action, you're someone who used to relying and is just unavailable for work assignments. You see an increase in interpersonal conflict and dissatisfaction. People are late. And then the less obvious form of all of this is it may appear as stoicism, but it's really numbing. The person is just kind of, they may not appear flat, but they're flat. They're not experiencing any emotion, and they've kind of shut down. Sometimes we think those people are doing really well because they don't seem upset, but that is not always the case, and that's hard to recognize and really may require more professional intervention. But certainly performance, appearance, behavior, and mood are ones we can all recognize in ourselves, our loved ones, and our coworkers. The pattern is really the same for adolescents as it is for adults. It manifests, and it really for children as well. It's all the same, very similar psychobiological responses, changes in sleep, changes in mood, particularly irritability and anger, changes in behavior, trouble sleeping, neglecting responsibilities, whether it's chores or schoolwork, changes in eating, overeating, eating too little, getting sick more often with colds and headaches and stomach distress. So again, just to reiterate the same point, even before the pandemic, the American Psychological Association commissioned research which concluded the experience of stress in teenagers from 13 to 17 is very similar to that of adults, particularly during the school year, with significant rates of depression and sadness and feeling tired and overwhelmed. And so it's even more important, and when with the pandemic layered on top of that, and either entirely remote school or going back and forth, a lot of young people are seeking mental health interventions. And again, within the pandemic, another study by the APA showed the group hardest hit by the pandemic across all ethnic groups, all any sort of background, religious, education, what have you, 13 to 24-year-olds. Why? Because they're at the point in life where they're trying to launch their independence, and social interaction is especially important for development. Again, same thing for, two things here that I haven't mentioned already. Make time for fun and time for quiet. Maybe not things we think about in terms of our children as much, the quiet part especially, but helping your children regulate their moods by setting a good example and unplugging from your electronics and bringing the temperature of the room down at home is really very important. Make time for fun. And I talked with one colleague whose little kids, bring a joke book to the dinner table and get the kids giggling, even if it's for 5 minutes and you've all been zooming away in your house. Little changes begin to accrue over time and can lead to bigger, more substantial change that make managing the day-to-day stress easier. Write about it. Teens, going back for ever like to write diaries. Well, there's a lot of data now that shows that writing about your experience, actually, for all of us in any age group, except for perhaps really little kids that don't have the language yet, is good for us. It relieves distress, and even programs of writing, like over 4 sessions on specific topics related to trauma, have been shown to improve mild to moderate PTSD and depression symptoms. And finally, for parents, I hear a lot, I feel so bad, my kid can't have a life the way they have it, we're all stressed out. I wish I could protect them from this more. And as parents, we all wish to protect our loved ones. But a slight shift in thinking about it may help you in that look at yourselves as role models for your kids. We are all under tremendous stress, and even outside of the pandemic, here, of course, we'll all face stress. And so modeling how to handle the difficult emotions and allowing your children to talk about them will go a long way in helping them to develop resilience as adults. Letting the kids be problem solvers. Well, they may not be able to solve the problems in your households. Unlikely they will be able to as children and adolescents, but letting them have a voice and sharing their ideas with you helps to increase a person's efficacy, and is particularly important for adolescents. And I'm sure you've all seen that in other spheres with your children before the pandemic. Media literacy, the wrong information or misinformation can be really, really scary. Where are you as a family getting information about the pandemic? Where are your children getting information? Talk with them about that and the importance of having accurate information and just the right dose. We usually recommend that you have a couple of reliable sources and that's it. And then you don't go surfing on the web to 10 different links that you can follow to learn more about the pandemic or anything else that might be of interest. So teaching your children to do that and then modeling it yourself is important. And then, of course, combating negative thinking. It's easy having catastrophic thoughts like the world's going to end, it's all dangerous, tends to happen with traumatic stress and depression where there's helplessness. Helping your kids to see a more, the glass half full approach is also an important intervention that we can do for ourselves and our children. Okay. So just in winding down now, so what can we do to help those in distress? Well, first recognizing it and naming it for what it is, and then taking a non-judgmental and supportive and validating approach that, again, a lot of people will feel bad, like I shouldn't feel bad, I'm alive, my family's alive, I have a job, what about the person down the street? But those are not generally the factors that determine who develops traumatic stress. It's usually perceived threat to one's life is the biggest predictor. And so offering support and just accepting where the person is at, listening. We tend to think of listening as passive, but listening empathically is a very active process and engaging and can be very, very much a healing thing that we can engage in with family and friends without having a mental health effect. If you're an employer, letting your colleagues and your direct reports know that it's okay to discuss mental health issues, it's okay to be upset, and that it's not going to affect their career, and assuming that it's not. If it is, that's of course that's a different set of circumstances. Knowing that coming to you is confidential and that you have confidential services like an EAP is really, really important. People, it's one of the first questions we get asked, is this confidential? Will my employer know? Modeling it yourself by just acknowledging that maybe you're a little out of sorts yourself here and there. Again, we're all in this together, and setting ourselves apart as leaders probably doesn't really help the situation. Conveying strength, but at the same time acknowledging that it's difficult for everyone is important, and conveying support. So in conclusion, I just want to acknowledge here, this is, there are evidence-based treatments if it turns out that you or a loved one or colleague is having some of these problems and symptoms and gets diagnosed with PTSD or depression or generalized anxiety. There are treatments that work. We know now from 2 decades of research from the World Trade Center, they're short term, and we know that the sooner you go into treatment, the shorter the treatment will be. So in other words, the longer you wait, the more problems will accrue, and the longer it may take. However, people 20, 30, 40 years after Korean War veterans came forward during the World Trade Center with the resurgence of symptoms, and we're still able to get better from it. So going at any time is better than not going at all, and going sooner is better than waiting. Again, I think we've covered all of this, but what keeps people from getting mental health care? Logistics, misinformed consumers, stigma is a big one that's getting better. But again, as leaders, as whether at work or at home, we can all do a lot to diminish the stigma associated with getting mental health care. Covered this. So in conclusion, what are the action items for you as an individual or an employer, a family member? Promote acceptance. You can do that in whatever your role in life is. Address the daily hassles. Again, one of the reasons daily hassles are associated with maintaining traumatic stress is that once you have that psychobiological response where your body prepares to fight, flee, or freeze, the next smaller stressor, like getting stuck in traffic, people tend to react more strongly. So it's like your accelerator is broken and you want to go 25 miles an hour, but all of a sudden you find yourself going 60 miles an hour. So promoting acceptance, addressing daily hassles, and being supportive, whether your role as a leader, as a parent, or a friend, or a colleague, are all things that we can all do with. And if we're not doing them yet, we can start doing them today. This is okay. So in conclusion, I hope that you're going to walk away with a little better sense of why you and your loved ones may be more tired and out of sort, and with a few solutions as to what you can do. If you haven't already received this handout, you will get it, I guess, in your email boxes or perhaps on your website sometime before the end of today. Thank you all very much.
Dr. Difede, thank you so much. It was amazing. And so much of what you said, I could relate to. I got slightly emotional on certain topics. I love the toothbrush analogy because I honestly think that it's a daily process. And I think mental health is a daily process. So thank you so much for saying mental health needs to look like physical health, because I think we also forget that on a daily basis, that it's the same thing, whether it's physical or mental, it needs to be dealt with. So I really appreciate you talking about that and making it real. So I'm going to hand it off to Alicia and Sharon to see if we have any questions, and anyone on the call or on the presentation. If you've got any questions, you can click on the Q&A or you can click on chat to ask Dr. Difede any questions.
Hi, this is Sharon. We've got some questions in here. I know one of the questions asked about the resources that you had, Dr. Difede, and so
Sure.
We will be providing that information.
Great.
To
Great.
So, you know, I don't need you to list off specific websites or anything like that. We'll make sure that we get that information.
Great. And feel free to give out my email as well. And if anyone wants to write to me directly, you can just put renew presentation in the subject line, and I'll make sure to it gets some attention sooner rather than later.
I can provide that, Dr. Difede. That's great. Thank you so much.
Yes,
sure, of course. Happy to do so.
One of the questions we've got is, how can we manage the anxiety of returning to normal? And what does normal even mean to people? I know that's something I personally am.
Right. Well, right. So normal is going to look different, probably. It's a matter of, and for each of us, the new normal may be different than what we anticipate. And so there's a lot of where I'm going with that is we don't know. And what does that do with humans? It creates uncertainty. And what happens when we're uncertain? We become anxious, some more than others. What's the best intervention? Structure. To the extent that we can structure the uncertainty using some of the simple the wellness techniques like regular schedules, and sticking to routines or quickly developing a new routine, are really, really important. Information about what the changes are likely to be, again, really important. Information about managing anxiety, also really, really important. And the principle there about returning to work, as we talked about a little bit earlier, the number one problem that I think we all really face is anticipatory anxiety. What's it going to be like? Will I be able to do it? Is the environment safe? Having information that's accurate, number one. So going back to Maslow's hierarchy, start at the bottom. What are meeting our physiological needs and our needs for safety? Begins with accurate information, routines, addressing some of the psychological threats. What are you doing as a company for your employees to manage the daily hassles? Like parking, more people are driving. Do you have adequate parking? Are you staggering hours? Can you do it on a consistent basis? If you're closing your lunchroom, where can people go? Answering those mundane, they seem like they're mundane things, but they really go to our fundamental sense of self. And then just letting people know that actually doing it, the Nike slogan, is probably the sort of behaviorist mantra, just do it. You have to do it, but in a way that's safe and secure. And then as you do it and first confront the fear, things will get better. I was talking to someone, actually my family is a world traveler for work and recreation, said, I can't believe it. The night before I traveled, I got on a plane. I was up all night. I just couldn't sleep. It was so ridiculous. What was I scared of? And I said, well, what you're scared of was what you didn't know. Like, would it be different this time because of the pandemic? And so just knowing that and educating ourselves and those in our social environment about anticipatory anxiety will go a long way toward helping.
Great, thank you. We've got a lot of good questions coming in here.
And I'm happy to go over, by the way. We can spend an extra 10 minutes. No problem. Sure.
We have a question here. Someone wrote, many of us work in very stressful professions where our hours are expected and required.
Right.
This cannot change, or our supervisors will not acknowledge the change, or the business model doesn't support it. What are the main methods we can use to triage stress?
Well, but I'm going to get to that in a second, but let me just touch on something I said earlier about the business model. You have to be able to convince your leadership, and I'm happy to provide data to the extent that we can, that actually it is in their best interests for you to manage your stress, because you will be a more effective worker. There'll be less absenteeism. There'll be an increase in productivity. And if you look at all the data on health claims, absenteeism, and disability, that's one. So that goes directly to the business model. But the other side of it for you as an individual, because that requires in some work cultures a sea change. That's not going to happen in the next 3 weeks or 6 months as many of us go back to work and then face the same stress, if not more, in whatever our industry is. As I was saying earlier, it seems so unsexy and like it's not going to be satisfying because the big problem is being addressed by these little things. But if you don't have a routine or it has to change getting into a new one, really paying attention to your sleep. There's a lot out there on sleep hygiene that, I mean, I'm sure we have that on our list. If you don't exercise, I mean, seriously, if I could convince you all to do one thing, exercise, get outside every day. I know you don't have time for lunch, but take a walk around the block, or if you're out in suburbia, take a walk on your cul-de-sac. Even 5 minutes, if you get into a routine over time, will begin to make a difference. And paradoxically, there's research that shows that when you take that 20 minutes or half an hour for meditation or something like that, or exercise, you begin to have more time because your body and your mind are working more efficiently. So sticking with those simple principles. If you had a really long day and you're kind of inclined not to call a family member or a friend if you are alone, pick up the phone and just say, I don't really want to talk to anybody. I just want to hear your voice. Okay, bye. That's better than not doing it all. So again, all of those principles that we were, learned, all those are backed by science now, and we should do as much as we don't want to do them. No easy answer then. And
I hear you on those. It's easy to say, oh, I should just make that phone call. It's much easier to say, I'll just do it tomorrow. Right.
And we keep pushing it off. And so I was going to make one new slide, and I just didn't get it today. Would have been on it for those of you, I'm sure there's a range of ages. Remember, Cher had a commercial a long time ago that said if good bodies came in a bottle, everyone would have one. Well, when she was back in her fitness guru days. Well, that's true for mental health. All these things are just require just sticking to it whether or not we want to, and there's no easy fix for that.
Very true, very true. One of the questions we have is, what are the differences you've seen between how men and women have been affected by just mental health in general, but particularly with the stress from COVID?
Well, traditionally in our society, even with the modernization of women in the workforce, more in the last generation, women usually have the primary caretaking role at home, even if they do have the career, the primary caretaking role for elderly relatives, whether it's their parents or their in-laws. And so balancing that now in the environment of the home with everyone on Zoom and perhaps kids on Zoom has, I think, made some of the stresses for women that much more compounded. And so there's I don't know if anyone saw it in the paper, I think it was about a week or two ago, that while drinking is up more for everybody, women are drinking even more. And so I think that is one of the big differences here. And that affects people across all sorts of careers. No one group is singled out there.
Thank you. This is a very specific question. One of our attendees wrote, one of my anxieties about returning to the office is not even about contracting COVID, but about the increasing cases of violence against Asian Americans, especially having to commute on a subway. How do I cope?
Right. And there isn't an easy answer to that either, right? I would say that the most important thing for you to do is to develop a routine that is as safe as possible. Talk with your employer about what they are doing to promote workplace safety for minority communities that are experiencing increases in hatred and violence recently. I know, for example, the medical college leadership, when this first started, put out a notice and encourage people to come forward, go to their EAP, go to their supervisors. So I would say start with your supervisor and talk about what kind of routine that you can develop for yourself that's safe. Talk to your family members about the same thing. What that is going to look different for everyone, depending upon where they live, what their commute is, what their work hours are, and things like that. And maybe go back to the old-fashioned carpooling and traveling with other people for a while. But there's just no simple answer. I so wish there was, but.
Great, thank you. I know that people have definitely concerns about that.
Yeah.
No, we're at 3:01. We're going to throw one more question at you here, if you wouldn't mind, because I think.
No. I said I'm happy to give you an extra 10 minutes. If you've got more, then that's really okay. I think this is way too important to be strict about time considerations.
Thank you. I know that's appreciated.
I left the extra time.
This is another fantastic question, one that I have thought of as well, is one of our attendees wrote, how do we get beyond the automatic good or fine responses when asked how you're doing, and being able to be honest and with how you're actually feeling?
Be honest yourselves, and then promote that to the extent that you have the social capital to do that in your family and in your work environment, and create an environment in which other people can do it. What does that mean? Be honest yourself maybe not 100% honest, but maybe you don't want to tell people you've been up all night or you and your spouse are fighting, but you could say, instead of saying good, you could say, like a lot of people, I'm a little more out of sorts these days, tensions are a little higher at home, and we're working on improving that. And then when other people say it, instead of turning a blind ear, right, give the person a chance to talk and, say, hey, what are you doing about it? You're aware of these resources. So affirming another person's experience, actively listening to it and then affirming it and acknowledging yourself. And so I've actually started, when I gave similar talks to our leadership, it's like, it's not okay. We're not okay. It's not okay. We're not okay. So just acknowledging, and again, this is blocked by a lot of psychological theory, a lot of data, acknowledging that we're not is a more effective or a path to mental health than continuing to say, oh, I'm good. So now when I do meetings myself, I'll just say, hang it in there, we may be more fortunate than most, but hanging in there. And a lot of people have come up to me privately and said, I really appreciate that you just said that. So what did I do? I named it. I was a little more candid than I might have been in prior years, and I gave other people the chance to say something themselves. And inevitably, some more people will begin to say similar things, right? And that can lead to more of a discussion where it's warranted.
That's great advice. Thank you. All right, final question. This is my own personal question, and I know there were some board Renew board members on the call as well, and they know this about me. I have a tendency for people to come to me with all of their grief or their anxieties or whatever. And so I have a hard time then letting other people know when I'm experiencing that. And when I do, sometimes I get pushback of, well, my trauma is greater than your trauma, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is hard to hear.
Yes. Yes. And of course, in some situations that may literally be true, because some of us have, are having a harder time and may have more problems with resources. And so it just compounds. That said, recognizing that as a person who provides help to others, but then accepting that we're all equal when it comes to our emotions. So you may only have the possibility of the threat of the virus itself, like everyone has. Whereas someone else may have lost a job, and someone may have been ill, someone may die, someone may be under-resourced or from a community that's being actively discriminated against now. It doesn't make your experience less valid, right? And finding a way to say that tactfully is a hard thing to do, but really necessary as a step toward naming where you're at, affirming where you're at, and helping other people see that, fundamentally, we've all got the same brain, and we've all been scared to a greater or lesser degree, and it's affected all of us, and the social disruption and isolation has affected all of us. So no simple answer there. These are all very good questions, all remarkably complex, and we can probably talk about all of them for so much longer. So I hope that it's a little bit helpful, and I'm affirming some of what you're probably trying to do already.
I do have a therapist that I meet with every other week. And one of the words that I've come up with that I'm learning to say is I'm depleted. I can't talk now because I'm depleted. And some people hear something and some people hear another thing. And so it's being able to communicate within my social circles about what that means.
Right. And, to that end, I think everybody has felt depleted at some point or other. Some of us may be more willing to acknowledge it than others. But again, going back to the wellness, the toothbrushing, exercising, looking at a tree, walking around the block, saying thank you to someone, making a new connection, all of those things can go a really long way to increasing our own reservoir. First for ourselves, and perhaps if we have kids or caring for elderly family members, and then our coworkers and colleagues when we leave the house, and friends.
Great. Well, that wraps up our questions. Kristen, did you want to bring us home here? Thank you, Dr. Difede.
Yes, I just want to
absolutely.
thank Dr. Difede. This was such great information. And I think I've gotten several text messages while we've been on the call today on how they've really felt that it was hitting home for them. So not only for them, but for their family members, their children, coworkers, whatever it may be. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. And I want to thank everyone on the call today that took time out of their extremely busy schedules to take an hour away from that to join us. So thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for inviting me to come today. And again, I'm available if anyone has more questions. Happy to do what I can. Take good care, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Dr. Difede.
Bye-bye.